Well, against all expectations, the Nikita Chibrikov era is about to begin. Is it going to be a fun one, or will Nikita be overwhelmed? Let's find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, there is a lot to talk about. The Jets have some new injury news. There is movement on the Kyle Connor contract situation, and we are finally likely bidding farewell to what should have been one of Winnipeg's better defensive prospects, but is now being sent back down to the Moose if he does not get claimed. So let's start off, of course, with the big news. Nikita Chibrikov on line 2. That is huge. Before we dive into the implications of this and why Nikita is on the top 6 on the second line, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com, and you could win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, if there's a winning bet in my mind that I think you should make, it's that Nikita Chibrikov is going to have a pretty successful run alongside Taves and Nyquist. Now, Chibrikov obviously wasn't really expected to become a starter this year. I said on the last video and in the comments that I was fully expecting him to get sent down. And then, of course, the game against the Flames happened, and there were some unexpected events. After already dealing with the loss of Taves temporarily for day-to-day stuff and Sandberg long-term on top of Lowry, who's been out for months, we lost Perfetti. Perfetti had some sort of an ankle injury, a bit of a sprain, we think, which is going to be probably a few weeks of recovery. Ankle sprains are very tough. You've seen a couple of those pop up for the Jets over the past couple of seasons. I wouldn't say it's like super common to happen to the Jets specifically, but it's not an uncommon pro sports athlete thing. So not good. That really bites. And, you know, I've wanted opportunities for guys like Lambert and Chibrikov, but not this way. I think I would love to have had them with a fully healthy team, right? You know, you put them in depth positions, you give them chances to maybe cut their teeth against weaker competition and offer more scoring depth to this team. But now the Jets are going to have to throw at least one of them, in this case, Chibrikov, right into the deep end and see if he can swim. Now, I think Chibrikov, of most of the Jets' prospects, is probably the guy that should have been with the Jets last year. Had he not injured his lower body, if I recall correctly, last season, I think there was a chance he might have been part of the Jets' playoff team. Maybe. We all know that Winnipeg doesn't really like to put a lot of rookies in, and Chibrikov has kind of bounced in and out of the lineup the past year or so. He had a couple of games during some injury spates. He's had some impressive showings in preseason and camp, and this year for him was supposed to be just working his way back from injury rehab, and over the course of preseason and the prospect showdown, he actually started to look more and more like he was his old self again, right? The first couple of games, you could definitely tell there was a lot of rust, and now he's been back up to full speed. So this season, you know, he's going to have probably a good few weeks here in the Jets lineup. How many games will he get? I don't know. That's a really good question. Maybe 5-10 games. I don't know how long Perfetti is going to be out for. I don't know that we have like an official confirmation of the timeline just yet. Ankle sprain seems to be what folks have been saying. I think the team has suggested this a little bit. So, it's going to be a little bit of an interesting one, right? You can't really rush back an ankle sprain. You've got to be careful. You don't want to aggravate it or make the injury worse. And, you know, with your skating legs, obviously it's really important to have your lower body in as intact a shape as it can be. So this is going to be a fun one. I wasn't really expecting this season to be like amazing, still pretty good, But the more and more injuries the Jets undergo here, the worse the start's going to be. So Chibrikov, the hope is that he really hits the ground running and does well so that, by the time Perfetti is back, Chibrikov makes himself unbenchable. Prove that you deserve to be with the big club, have a big run, and by the time the other parts of the team start to get healthy, this is how you could potentially raise your team ceiling. I've talked a lot about that the past couple of seasons, how the Jets can go from just being regular season great to truly being playoff great. They're not the same thing. And I get into a lot of arguments with people. Everyone always yells at me about first in the league last season and all that. And I get it, right? Like, I don't disagree. The Jets had an amazing President's Trophy run. You literally achieved the highest honor for a regular season that you could have, a President's Trophy, winning the division, winning the conference. And, being first in the league on top of a bunch of individual player awards, there's really not much more you can do. So, obviously the playoff part is where the Jets still have work to do. Last year's playoff run, much improved. They actually won more than one game, which is a huge deal. Like, I know it sounds like a low bar, but this team proved that it was a lot closer than it had been. But we all know that year over year, time moves very quickly. And I think the Jets haven't always wisened up to that fact. It's why, the 2017-2018 team wasn't really one that was easily replicable. Despite the fact that we kept talking about the Jets back then as starting off a dynasty, that dynasty tailed off very quickly. So it's important that you take every season that you can and have the ability to, and really think about swinging or trying to figure out how you can make this team stronger and better. Having Chibrikov back in your lineup might just be a way that you can do that internally, especially if you're not really keen on doing a lot of big trades. We know the Jets aren't a team that likes to add externally, not, with big signings or big trades. They just don't have a habit of this. So why not make use of the young talent that you've got and see if any of these guys can be really good peripheral players and scorers for your team? Chibrikov, I think, fits into this mold, and I expect him to be a really big pest, on the forecheck, in the corners. He's going to have defensive lapses, so just be prepared for that. But in terms of being one of those offensive motors with a great shot, I think we're going to see him be a real menace. And, I wouldn't be shocked if he's, maybe half a point per game or something. This is going to be a tougher start, probably. You're not going to have a lot of foot speed on his line outside of what he can do. And so he's going to have to, adjust his pace. And, he's not traditionally been a big transition player. So we'll see if he can help Taves and Nyquist maybe get the puck up the ice. Nyquist is okay in terms of skating around, but of course he's not the fastest. Taves also not the fastest. Both have NHL speed. There's no question about that. But of course, they're going to be going against even faster opponents. So this will be interesting, right? It's at least faster than what you were likely going to get with Perfetti. But of course, Cole is a really smart player who does a ton of two-way work, and Chibrikov is not quite that guy. He's an energetic pest who's probably best in like a third-line role. And now you're asking him to be alongside Taves and Nyquist in a really big scoring role. I do think he'll do well. I think he'll be a very solid peripheral scorer. I think he'll probably prove that he should be in your middle six rotation. And I'm going to set modest expectations, but I think he's going to be very good to the point where you probably can't send him back down. But we know how the Jets are sometimes. They don't always agree with that, especially with their waiver exempt guys. So curious to know how you feel about this. Chibrikov did just re-sign for 2 years on a one-way deal, so that part's very interesting. It's a little over league minimum per season, so that's a great deal. Very happy to have him back for the next year or two, and it'll be interesting to see how his role with the Jets evolves. If he's re-signing, my guess is, the Jets do think that he's going to be an important part of this team, and on such a bargain contract, it is really important that for the next couple of years that you've got him cheap, you make the most of what this core can do. So, got to be a fun one. Let's see how they add. Speaking of re-signing, we have heard that the Jets and Kyle Connor might be close to finalizing a new deal. We'll talk about the impact of that and the scale coming right up. Before we do, though, wanted to shout out about our friends and partners at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth. Whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments, if you don't have the full picture, you could be leaving money on the table. Monarch Money is here to help. It's the all in one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one easy to use, clean interface on your laptop or your phone. It's built for people with busy lives. If you have too much going on and you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch Money is here to help. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, get categorization of your spending all in one easy to use interface that doesn't allow you to touch a spreadsheet, right? You don't have to worry about any fun formulas and cells. It's all in an easy to use application. And you know what? If you've got a partner or spouse, you can have a shared account so you'll always be on the same page. You can set financial goals together and track all your investments to make sure that your money is working the way you want it to. So don't let financial opportunities slip by. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are chatting about the start of the Nikita Chibrikov era. And of course, there's another big piece of news. According to some reports, might have been Dreger or somebody else, it seems like the Jets and Kyle Connor are starting to finally close the gap on whatever contract deal they're working on here. We know that it's going to be in the $12 to $13 million range. We don't know the term, though. The term remains a bit of a mystery. And we have also heard that part of the sticking point originally was the contract structure, which for the Jets, they don't often like to do a lot of signing bonuses typically or performance bonuses. They tend to want a lot of these deals to be more in their favor, of course. And, obviously signing bonuses, lots of cash up front can be a little funky for the Jets. They don't always enjoy that. So this is going to be interesting to see how all of this pans out and whether it starts to look more like the Marner contract or if the Jets have some sort of a middle ground with Kyle's camp. Connor definitely doesn't seem to want to leave, so I would think that there is some incentive to figure this out. But in terms of Kyle's camp, he doesn't have to rush it. It's really the Jets that have to do all of the sorting out here over the next couple of days. And apparently they're trying to close this deal before Thursday, which, okay, you know what? I see the vision and stuff. I think where my concern partly starts to come in is you are committing a lot of money to KFC. Now, in and of itself, not a problem. Top teams sign their stars again. They bring their biggest players back. I think with how the Jets have been, though, unlike a lot of other teams, the Jets tend to be very set in their ways. And I think when you have that happen, other teams change their lineups. They'll experiment more. They'll bring in more youth and talent. And the Jets just don't really seem to do that. They're one of the only NHL teams out there in the entire league that doesn't change the top line and that has very little room for young rookies to make the team. There's not often opportunities when the team is fully healthy to see new combinations and stuff. The Jets think that their formula is the best. And I think a lot of it is because, the regular season is so successful and they have established a model of getting enough revenue to where the franchise valuation is very good. Following this past year, I think they're worth something like $1.3 billion now, which is actually pretty darn impressive for a team like Winnipeg that's in a really small market. The Jets are doing well. And so I don't know that there's a lot of incentive for them to think about adjustments. But again, I come back to this idea of how does this team reach the next level in the playoffs? And if you bring back Kyle, you're kind of now locked into this core of Connor, Scheifele, Hellebuck, Morrissey. For as long as you've got these guys under contract, you've got to find a way to add around the perimeter and get this team into a really competitive state. I still insist on the idea that the foundation of what the Jets have is strong. You have the best goalie in the league. You have one of the best defenders in the league. You've got a couple of really good top six players in Velarde, Scheifele, and Connor on fairly reasonable deals. Connor's deal's not going to be as cheap, and we know that. But the rest of the guys, you're paying fairly okay salaries that are going to look really nice as the cap continues to jump. And by the way, it does sound like the cap may go up even further than initially anticipated. So maybe the pro rating actually looks even cheaper over the next couple of seasons. But Winnipeg now has to figure out how to take advantage of that and add around the perimeter, right? How do you build this team into like a true champion? And that's where I think, you look at the Panthers, you look at the Oilers, you look at Dallas and some of these other teams. Look at how they've built off of ELCs and how they kind of integrate in a lot of their youth on top of a really existing strong foundation of veterans. I think the Jets obviously have some issues where they don't always have um, the McKinnons or the McDavids, and I always say that. But if you have four really strong lines that you can roll and sort of just own offensive possession all the time on top of a very strong defensive structure, I think you can still win that way. And I really do believe the Jets have the ability to do that. But they have to open themselves up more to it. And if they do this with Connor, I really hope that they rethink how they've built this team. I think that there's ways to rearrange the lineups to get more out of it. I think you can find new line combinations, you can experiment, and I think you can spread out the wealth a bit more. The Jets don't have some of the luxuries of other teams, but they have a very strong defensive core. They've got a team that can, at full health, really go toe to toe with some of the best out there. They've got a goalie who is a multi-Vezina winner. Build off of that. Use the foundation that you have and supplement it with a lot of really good young talent. I think about how the Jets used to do this, and that's why I'm kind of puzzled as to why we haven't seen that. The Jets are very vet heavy, and we all like veterans. There's nothing wrong with that. Experience is great. It can be incredibly helpful in key moments when you need a player to make a very specific choice or decision under a lot of pressure in a big moment. But the kinds of veterans that the Jets tend to bring in don't always have that extra jump compared to some of the other guys out there. And so you need to raise the ceiling internally if you're not going to do it externally. It's kind of why I really think that this chance for Nikita Chibrikov is a big deal. And Kyle Connor's contract is going to reshape how the Jets approach the next several seasons. You're really committing to this window, right? 3 years, including this season. I'm already kind of writing the season off for now. I'm not going to be sad either way. I'll be fine if the Jets make the playoffs and do well. If they don't, I am not really upset. I think that could be perfectly okay, especially if Winnipeg comes out with a big, draft pick of some sort. I'm not going to be upset, right? I think there are multiple ways to win the season, but from Winnipeg's perspective, they view this as a big season to try and go and chase a cup. I think a lot of the models are still relatively high on the Jets. I'm personally not, just because I think, with the amount of injuries the team has already endured, it's going to be harder for them to come out of the gates swinging, right? You're going to have a lot of next man up mentality, and we don't really know if Taves is going to be healthy, going forward. We don't know how this team's going to be with Sandberg. Is he going to have lingering injury issues? How is Scheifele going to hold up? We haven't seen Hellebuck have any issues, but is he going to be good to go this whole year? So there's a lot of stuff that I would say is a little uncertain. Some parts that are a lot uncertain. Perfetti being out is obviously a huge blow, and we haven't even gotten to the start of the season yet. So there's a lot that I think already is putting the Jets behind the eight ball. But this is where, the development of your youth, getting them NHL time and getting them ramped up for not only this season, but next season could really help set the Jets up for a brighter future over the next couple of years. I know that this year, no one wants to think about this team maybe taking a step back, but I don't think that's a bad thing, especially with the fact that the Jets have committed a lot of these one-year deals. It's not a big commitment. It's, a short-term thing. It's a stopgap solution, and the Jets can sell if they need to. I think Winnipeg was very wise to not go all in when they didn't see what they wanted in the free agent market or in the trade market. Do I think that it would have been nice if they'd been able to go out and get a McTavish? Of course. And I think that's the kind of swing you need to take. Or in the case of maybe a Christian Reichel, look at something like that. Reichel's trying to move, so maybe you could take a bit of a pot shot at that. Maybe you go for Jack Roslovic here. You could do these sort of short-term things with some upside, but I think the bigger storyline is that the Jets kind of have to do all of this stuff internally first and then figure out what they need next season. So There's a lot of moving parts here. I think the Jets are going to be in a bit of a holding pattern this season. And as long as that they're willing to kind of give more of their youth a bigger shot at actually making the team and making an impact, I think you can come out of this on the winning side. So interested to see how these next few weeks go. Rooting for Chibrikov. We'll see what the Kyle Connor contract looks like and how that's going to really impact the team going forward. But of course, we are going to say farewell to one of my favorite Jets prospects, Ville Heinola. I believe this waiving is probably the end of his time as a Winnipeg Jet. We'll talk about why coming right up. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right, pick a bet, put $5 down, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Maybe you think you know who's going to win the Super Bowl, or maybe you think you know who's going to win Sunday's upcoming matchups. As a Ravens fan, I'd prefer not to think about football right now, but a lot of you are probably feeling okay about the Vikings. Maybe you're also a Chiefs fan out there. You think Mahomes' magic is on the return, or maybe you feel like the Pats under Drake May are about to have the run of their lives. No matter what team you root for, though, you can win big by going to FanDuel.com and downloading the FanDuel app today to get started. Remember, new customers, $5 bet. If it wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to keep on winning. So go to FanDuel.com right now. Hey, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts in tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on these closing thoughts as we are chatting a little bit about a bit of a farewell to one of my favorite Jets prospects. You know, this is a guy that I thought at one point had a very high ceiling, and unfortunately, the past several years, either due to, some coaching decisions or just a preference for a different style of defender, the Jets never really found out what Ville Heinola could be for them. Instead, they opted for guys like Logan Stanley, Hayden Fleury, Luke Shen, players like this. And I understand the preference for size and strength, but I do think the Jets have occasionally missed out on what you could do and how you could sort of structure this blue line to be more modern. I think sometimes Winnipeg thinks they're a little more resolute with some of these depth pairings than they really are. And, we've seen some of that kind of bite the Jets recently. We've got Stanley and Pionk playing as a pairing together, which so far, outside of the Flames game, and, honestly, I don't know that the Flames game was quite as good as people want it to be. That pairing's not been very, very fun to watch. I think you've got other scenarios where, Fleury and Shen are going to have some real issues. I think when you play good teams, you see Winnipeg's blue line really take some hits. So a guy like Heinola would have been interesting to try and speed up, the puck cycling and getting the puck up the ice. The transition stuff would have been helpful. But at the end of the day, right, the Jets have kind of had him in the press box for many years. It's, at this point, not really productive to keep him there. They've sent him down. I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't get claimed. I think at this stage of his career, a lot of players of his ilk are starting to move overseas. The NHL just doesn't seem to value these puck-moving, offensively minded blue liners in the same way that they used to. They look at size first as being one of the first traits that they really go for. And, in my mind, size is helpful, but it has to be married to mobility and skill. If you just have a big player who doesn't really offer you a lot in transition, who gets stuck in their own end a lot, isn't that mobile, I don't know that they're actually accomplishing the job that you want them to. Yes, they can block shots and throw some hands, but if you need the puck out of your own defensive zone faster, they're probably not going to be the guys to do it on a consistent basis. So we'll see how that kind of impacts what Winnipeg does going forward. I think for Heinola, I'm just mostly disappointed for him. He's been told many times that he'd have a chance and a real opportunity to make the team, and I've really never seen it. There were a couple of moments where I thought he maybe had a chance, but like the moment he made a mistake, it was him that was usually riding pine. And I don't mind, sending a message to players, but that same message hasn't really been sent to a lot of the other guys. You watch some of our more routine defenders make a ton of mistakes, and their ice time never declines. In fact, some of them get upgraded. So I just don't know why we've always seen these sorts of double standards for players like this, but it's water under the bridge at this point. My hope is that Heinola goes, somewhere else, gets a chance to actually shine, and maybe there's a team out there that would be willing to put in a claim on him and see if he can be something at least passable, right? I don't know that his ceiling is ever going to be achievable at this stage of his career. 24, almost 25 now. His ceiling has probably been passed by at this point. So if he becomes a solid second pair or third pairing defender, I think that's really the best that you could hope for. It's a shame because he was really part of Finland's future decor, and all of these years in time off, whether due to injury or just being press boxed constantly, I can't imagine that's really done a good thing for his mental health or his development. So I hope some team claims him, right? I think it's time for somebody else to give him a shot. He's never going to get it here. And I hope that the Jets don't do this with some of their other D prospects. Salomonson, they do seem to rate pretty highly, so I don't worry about that. But I wonder, how does Boumediene feel about all of this? Where do guys like Angle and Brown and some of these other Jets D prospects fit into the grand scheme of things? So, I look at what the Jets have kind of prioritized, who they're putting in, and I just, I don't know how to feel about all this. I'm a little disappointed. I'm hoping that this is one of the last prospects that they do this to. I feel like Winnipeg has started to adjust how they're drafting and what they're looking for, and hopefully the kinds of archetypes that they're picking up are players that coaches will actually use. So if there's anything to kind of take away from this, it's that maybe the Jets are going to find more Dylan Sandberg types that coaches will actually trust, and that will actually play minutes for the Jets. But curious to know how you feel about Heinola's tenure here. Do you think he really got the shot he deserved? Do you think I'm sort of overstating Winnipeg not really having opened up many doors for him? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Later this week, we will have, of course, the announcement of any sort of Kyle Connor contract. We'll have a preview of the opening of the season this coming Thursday. All the fun stuff. The NHL season's finally here. Let's hope the Jets can make it through these first few rough weeks and come out stronger on the other side. But for tonight's show, that's all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.